"Why does your daughter look so much like me?" Rachel Hayes asked, and for the first time that evening, the crowded ballroom had no answer. 7-year-old Emily Carter stood beneath the crystal lights of the Hayes Grand Hotel, one small hand wrapped around her father's calloused fingers, while 200 executives, investors, and elegantly dressed guests seemed to forget how to breathe. Ryan Carter had not come to the gala as a guest. At 32, with dark brown hair, a strong frame, and the tired, steady eyes of a man who had learned to carry responsibility without complaining, he was simply the maintenance supervisor called upstairs when a lighting panel failed 20 minutes before Rachel's speech. His babysitter had canceled. Emily had nowhere else to go, so she sat quietly near the service corridor with a coloring book while her father worked. That should have been the whole story. Then Rachel saw her. At 28, Rachel Hayes had built a reputation for walking into difficult rooms and making uncertainty disappear. Tonight, in a midnight blue business dress beneath warm chandelier light, her blonde hair neatly pinned back, she had been halfway through a sentence about the company's future when her voice simply stopped. Emily had looked up from her drawing. Rachel stared. Same pale blonde hair. Same blue-gray eyes. Same small dimple appearing on the left cheek when Emily smiled nervously. Then the child pushed a loose strand of hair behind her right ear with a peculiar two-finger motion Rachel had done since childhood. Rachel slowly lowered the microphone. "What's your name?" she asked. "Emily Carter." "And he's your father?" Emily nodded proudly. "That's my dad." Ryan stepped closer, sensing every eye turning toward them. Rachel looked from Emily to Ryan, confusion replacing the polished confidence everyone in the room knew. "Mr. Carter, is she really your daughter?" "Yes." "How old is she?" "7." 3 questions. 3 quiet answers. Somewhere behind them, silverware touched porcelain with a faint click. The air smelled of coffee, roses, and expensive perfume. Yet Ryan suddenly remembered another room, another night, and a promise made beside a woman who was no longer alive. Rachel crouched until she was level with Emily. Her expression softened, but the question in her eyes only deepened. Then she noticed the little silver bracelet around Emily's wrist. Rachel froze. Her own mother had given her an identical bracelet when she was 16. She rose slowly and faced Ryan again. "Why?" she whispered. "Does your daughter look so much like me?" Ryan could have lied. He could have walked away. Instead, he glanced toward the rear of the ballroom, where Margaret Hayes, Rachel's mother, stood beside a table holding a champagne glass. Ryan's face remained calm. His voice was quiet enough that Rachel had to lean closer, yet somehow everyone nearby heard him. "You should ask your mother." Margaret's fingers opened. The glass slipped onto the white tablecloth, spilling champagne across the linen. Rachel turned toward her. Margaret had gone pale. And in that instant, Rachel understood something far more frightening than coincidence. Ryan Carter had not been surprised by her question. By 7 the next morning, the ballroom felt like another world. Ryan Carter stood in the narrow kitchen of his second-floor apartment, turning pancakes on an old iron skillet while rain tapped softly against the window above the sink. Emily sat at the table in purple pajamas, carefully coloring a horse blue because, as she had once explained, ordinary horses already had enough people drawing them correctly. "Dad." "Yeah, kiddo." "Was that lady mad at us?" Ryan stopped for half a second. "No, she looked scared." Sometimes people look scared when they remember something they were not ready to remember. Emily considered that with the seriousness only a 7-year-old could give a pancake breakfast. She was pretty. Ryan smiled faintly. "Eat your breakfast." Their apartment was modest, 600 square feet above a neighborhood hardware store, with secondhand furniture, family photographs, and a refrigerator covered in school drawings. Nothing matched except the feeling of home. Ryan had built that feeling carefully after Grace died 4 years earlier. He worked early shifts, accepted weekend calls, learned how to braid hair badly and pack lunches well, and never allowed Emily to hear him complain about money. At the hotel, people knew him as the man who fixed what everyone else walked past. A leaking faucet, a broken elevator button, a loose handrail. Once, he found an envelope containing nearly $900 beneath a conference table and returned every dollar before anyone reported it missing. Another time, he traded his Christmas morning shift with a coworker whose mother was recovering from surgery. Ryan never called those things kindness. To him, they were simply choices. Grace used to say character was what remained when nobody was watching. Ryan had spent 4 years trying to make sure Emily grew up believing that. Daddy, Emily interrupted. Why do I not have a mom anymore? The question still found the same tender place in him. Ryan set the spatula down and sat across from her. You had Grace. I know, but was she my real mom? Silence settled between them. Rain whispered against the glass. The refrigerator hummed. Ryan looked at the silver bracelet around Emily's wrist, the one Grace had placed in a small wooden box before her final weeks. She was real in every way that mattered, he said. Emily lowered her eyes. But I did not come from her. Ryan swallowed. No, sweetheart. Then where did I come from? He reached across the table and covered her small hand with his. From a complicated story that belongs to you. And when the time is right, I promise you will know all of it. Emily nodded because she trusted him more easily than adults trusted truth. 20 minutes later, Ryan walked her to school, carrying her backpack when the rain grew heavier. He watched until she disappeared through the front doors, then checked his phone. 11 missed calls waited on the screen. 9 were from hotel management. 1 was from an unknown number. The last was from Rachel Hayes. Ryan stared at her message for several seconds. She wanted to meet privately. No lawyers. No executives. No Margaret. Ryan slipped the phone into his pocket and headed toward his old pickup. Across town, Rachel sat alone in her office with a photograph her mother had kept hidden for 7 years. Grace Carter stood in the center of it, smiling. Margaret stood beside her, and on Grace's wrist was the same silver bracelet Emily had worn the night before. Rachel chose a quiet coffee shop 3 blocks from the hotel, the kind with scratched wooden tables and a brass bell above the door. When Ryan arrived at 10:15, she was already seated in the back corner, untouched coffee cooling beside a manila envelope. No assistant. No security. No polished executive smile. Thank you for coming. You said privately. I meant it. Ryan removed his rain jacket and sat across from her. Rachel pushed a photograph toward him. Grace stood beneath a summer sky beside Margaret Hayes, both women younger, smiling as though whatever came later had not yet found them. Ryan studied it without surprise. Rachel noticed. You have seen this before. A copy. Then tell me what I am looking at. Ryan reached into his jacket and placed a small wooden box on the table. The hinges creaked when he opened it. Inside were photographs, an old hospital identification card, a sealed envelope, and another silver bracelet. Rachel touched her own wrist instinctively. Grace had one too. She had several things connected to your family. Rachel leaned forward. Was she my mother's employee? For a while. Was she my friend? Ryan paused. More than you remember. Rachel frowned. Ryan selected a photograph and slid it across the table. Rachel stared at the image. She was 19, standing beside Grace at what appeared to be a charity picnic. Rachel remembered the yellow tent. She remembered her mother leaving early. She did not remember Grace. Why can I not remember her? That is something Margaret needs to answer. Rachel's patience cracked. Stop protecting my mother. Ryan's eyes remained steady. I am protecting Emily. From me. From adults turning her life into evidence. The words landed quietly. Rachel looked away. Outside, tires whispered across wet pavement. A milk steamer hissed behind the counter. Then Ryan removed a folded document from the box. Grace could not have biological children, he said. Rachel slowly looked back at him. What? Emily was not Grace's biological daughter. Rachel's face lost its color. Then whose daughter is she? Ryan did not answer. Instead, he placed the sealed envelope between them. Written across the front in Grace's handwriting were 2 words. For Rachel. Rachel reached for it, but Ryan gently covered the envelope with his hand. Grace made me promise you would hear the truth from the person who took your choice away before you read this. My mother. That is what Grace believed. Rachel stared at him. Believed? Ryan withdrew his hand. Grace learned something near the end that made her question the story she had been given. Rachel's breathing slowed. What story? Ryan glanced toward the old hospital card inside the box. A tiny detail had bothered him for years. The name of the attending physician had been crossed out and replaced in different ink. He had never known why. I do not know enough to accuse anyone, he said. But I know enough not to trust one document. Rachel looked again at the photograph, then at the bracelets. And Emily? Ryan's expression softened. She has been my daughter since the first night I held her. Rachel swallowed. Did Grace ever tell you why Emily looks like me? Ryan was silent for several seconds. She thought she knew. And you? I think Grace died knowing she had been wrong about one important thing. Before Rachel could ask what he meant, her phone vibrated. A message from Margaret filled the screen. Do not open Grace's letter. Rachel read it twice. Then another message appeared. There is something Ryan does not know. Rachel raised her eyes toward him, but Ryan was staring through the coffee shop window at a black sedan parked across the street. It had been there when he arrived, and hanging from its rearview mirror was a small silver charm shaped exactly like Emily's bracelet clasp. The black sedan pulled away before Ryan could read the license plate, leaving only a thin spray of rain behind its tires. Rachel followed his gaze. Do you know that car? No. Then why are you watching it? Because it was watching us. Rachel looked at the messages from Margaret again, then stood. Come with me. 40 minutes later, they entered Margaret Hayes's home on the north side of the city, a quiet brick house surrounded by old maple trees. It was comfortable, but surprisingly modest for the mother of a woman whose company owned luxury hotels across the country. Margaret waited in the living room beside an unlit fireplace. She did not offer coffee. She did not ask why Ryan had come. Her eyes went immediately to the wooden box beneath his arm. Grace should have destroyed that. Ryan set it carefully on the table. Grace did not destroy things just because the truth made someone uncomfortable. Margaret flinched. Rachel remained standing. Tell me about Emily. Rachel, no more protecting me. You do not understand. Then help me understand. 3 short demands. 3 seconds of silence. Outside, rain traced narrow lines down the windows while an antique clock counted every second Margaret refused to speak. Finally, she sat down. 7 years ago, I was told there was a baby connected to you. Rachel gripped the back of a chair. Connected how? Margaret looked at Ryan, then back at her daughter. I was told she was yours. The room seemed to shrink. Rachel sat slowly. I had a daughter? I believed you did. Margaret's voice trembled. She explained that during a period Rachel remembered only in fragments. Following a private medical crisis and months of recovery, Margaret had received documents claiming an infant had been placed under confidential guardianship. Grace, who had worked with a family charitable program, became involved when the original arrangement began falling apart. You were 19, Margaret whispered. You were overwhelmed, and the people advising me said bringing the child into your life would destroy your future. Rachel stared at her mother. So you decided my future for me? Margaret lowered her eyes. Yes. Ryan said nothing. His quiet carried more judgment than anger could have. Rachel wiped a tear from her cheek. Where did Grace fit into this? She offered to protect the baby temporarily. Then she and Ryan became the only stable home Emily knew. Margaret looked toward him. Grace loved her. So did I, Ryan said. So do I. Margaret nodded, ashamed. I know. Rachel suddenly looked up. Then Emily is my daughter. Margaret hesitated. That hesitation changed everything. I do not know. Rachel went still. Margaret crossed the room and opened a locked desk drawer. From inside, she removed a yellowed hospital record. 6 months after Grace took Emily, she discovered inconsistencies, dates that did not match, a physician's signature that had been altered, and one laboratory notation that made no sense. Ryan unfolded the paper. Rachel leaned beside him. Near the bottom was a blood type entry. Ryan frowned. He knew Emily's blood type from pediatric records. The information did not match what Grace had been told about Rachel. Grace confronted me, Margaret said. I confronted the attorney who arranged everything. 2 days later, his office closed, and he disappeared from our lives. Rachel whispered, Who was he? Margaret looked toward the rain-darkened window. His name was Charles Price. Ryan felt the room change. Rachel did too. Price, she repeated. Margaret nodded. Daniel Price's father. Silence returned, colder now. Ryan thought of the sedan, the silver charm, and Grace's warning that money must never decide who Emily's family was. Then Margaret said the one thing neither of them expected. There is another record. Grace found it shortly before she died. Where? Ryan asked. Margaret looked directly at him. She hid it somewhere she knew only Emily would eventually think to look. Ryan drove home with Margaret's words following him through every red light. Grace had hidden something for Emily. Not for him. Not for Rachel. For Emily. By the time he reached the apartment, the rain had faded into a cold gray mist. Emily was already home from school, sitting cross-legged on the living room rug with her backpack open beside her. Mrs. Parker from downstairs had picked her up, just as Ryan had arranged. Daddy, look. Emily held up a paper covered in colored pencil. Family tree assignment. Ryan stopped near the doorway. That looks complicated. It is. She pointed to a blank branch. I do not know what goes here. Ryan knew exactly what she meant. Before he could answer, Emily reached into her backpack and pulled out the silver bracelet. This came loose today. Ryan took it carefully. The clasp had separated from the chain. He turned it beneath the kitchen light and noticed something he had never seen before. Tiny letters were engraved inside the clasp. G.C. 17. His pulse slowed. Grace Carter. 17. Where did Mom keep her special things? He asked. Emily frowned. The music box. Ryan looked toward the hallway. Grace's old wooden music box had remained untouched on the top shelf of Emily's closet for 4 years. Emily led him there, dragging a small chair across the carpet. Ryan lifted the box down. Inside were faded photographs, 2 handwritten recipes, a dried flower, and an old digital voice recorder no larger than his palm. Beneath it sat an envelope marked with the number 17. Ryan stared at it. Emily whispered, was Mom hiding treasure? Maybe something more important. He did not open it. Grace had left it for Emily, and dignity meant respecting promises even when curiosity hurt. His phone rang before he could decide what to do. Daniel Price. Ryan answered. Mr. Carter, we need to discuss your employment. Daniel's voice was polished and calm. There are concerns about your behavior at the gala. What behavior? Approaching Miss Hayes with a child and making statements about her family. Ryan's jaw tightened. Rachel approached us. That is not how several guests remember it. Then several guests remember poorly. A pause. Daniel's tone cooled. This can disappear quietly. The company can offer you 6 months of salary if you resign and agree not to contact Rachel Hayes again. Ryan looked at Emily. No, think carefully. I did. Everyone has a number, Mr. Carter. Ryan's answer came without hesitation. My daughter is not a number. He ended the call. 20 minutes later, Rachel arrived unexpectedly. She had heard from hotel management that Ryan was being pressured to resign. Her anger filled the small kitchen before she removed her coat. I can stop this. I do not need you to. Daniel cannot treat you this way. He already did. Rachel stared at the recorder on the table. What is that? Ryan explained what Emily had found. Rachel looked at the envelope, then at him. Open it. It belongs to Emily. Ryan, this could prove everything. Or destroy something she deserves to understand when she is ready. Rachel's frustration sharpened. You keep deciding what I am allowed to know. Ryan finally looked directly at her. And you keep treating the truth like a corporate problem you can solve by taking control. The word stopped her. Emily appeared quietly in the doorway. She had heard enough to understand that adults were arguing about her. Dad, Ryan immediately softened. I am here. Emily walked to the table, picked up the recorder, and held it against her chest. Mom left it for me, right? I think so. Emily considered this, then placed it between Ryan and Rachel. Then I want us to hear it together. Rachel slowly sat down. Ryan pressed the power button. Static whispered from the tiny speaker. Then Grace's voice filled the kitchen for the first time in 4 years. Ryan, if Emily found this, then the bracelet did exactly what I hoped it would. Ryan closed his eyes. Rachel covered her mouth. Grace continued, calm and unmistakable. Before anyone tells Emily who she belongs to, there is one truth she must know. The hospital record was changed, but not for the reason Margaret thinks. Grace's voice trembled through the tiny speaker, softer than Ryan remembered, but still carrying the calm certainty that had once made their apartment feel safe. Margaret believed the records were changed to hide Rachel's child from her. I believed that too, until 3 weeks before I died. Ryan sat perfectly still. Emily leaned against his arm, while Rachel stared at the recorder as if the next sentence might rearrange her entire life. I found 2 intake numbers, Grace continued. 2 newborn records from the same night, processed through the same private family services office. Someone combined information from both files. Emily was one of those babies, but I could never prove which record truly belonged to her. Rachel whispered, 2 babies? Ryan raised one finger gently, asking her to listen. Grace's recording continued. Charles Price knew I was asking questions. He told me some truths protect families better than facts. I told him a lie does not become kindness just because a wealthy man calls it protection. Emily looked up at Ryan. She sounds like you. His eyes grew damp. She was better. A faint breath could be heard on the recording before Grace spoke again. Ryan, do not let money decide this. Do not let fear decide it. And if Rachel ever hears my voice, tell her I am sorry. She deserved a choice. Emily deserves one too. Static followed. Then came a final sentence. The original laboratory reference is not in the hospital file. I put it inside the blue songbook. The recording ended. Nobody moved. The refrigerator hummed. Rainwater ticked from the fire escape outside. Rachel finally asked, "What blue songbook?" Ryan looked toward the old, upright piano in the corner. Grace had played it when Emily was a toddler, usually from a faded collection of American folk songs with a blue cloth cover. Ryan crossed the room and opened the bench. Beneath several music books lay the blue volume. Inside its back cover was a narrow envelope containing a laboratory accession number and the name of a medical records facility in Maryland. Rachel reached for her phone. "I can have someone retrieve this tonight." Ryan closed the book. No company lawyers. Ryan. No Daniel. No board. Nobody who benefits from the answer. Rachel studied him, then slowly lowered her phone. All right. It was the first time she had surrendered control without resistance. The next morning, Rachel used an independent attorney outside Hayes Hospitality to request the archived material. What came back was not a complete answer, but it was enough to change the direction of everything. The accession number belonged to a preserved newborn screening sample, legally restricted but potentially available through a court-approved identity proceeding. More importantly, its registration date matched Emily's birth date. Rachel read the report twice. "We can compare DNA." Ryan nodded. "Only if Emily understands what we are asking." Rachel looked toward the living room, where Emily was building a cardboard house for a stuffed rabbit. "What if she is mine?" Ryan's expression remained gentle. "Then you learn how to be part of her life." Rachel swallowed. "And what happens to you?" Ryan looked at his daughter. "Nothing happens to me. I am her dad." That afternoon, Daniel Price called Rachel directly. "You need to stop digging." "Why?" "Because some doors were closed for a reason." "That sounds like something your father would say." Daniel went silent. Rachel's eyes narrowed. "You knew about Charles." "Rachel, listen to me. Did you know about Emily?" Another silence. "Too long." Then Daniel said quietly, "You are asking the wrong question." The call ended. Rachel stared at the dark screen. Across the room, Ryan opened Grace's envelope again and noticed something printed beneath the laboratory number in letters so faint he had missed them before. Twin registry reference. He said nothing yet, but for the first time, he understood why one child could look exactly like Rachel without the truth being as simple as anyone believed. The words twin registry reference stayed in Ryan's mind long after Emily had gone to sleep. He sat at the kitchen table beneath the yellow light, Grace's paper beside him, while Rachel stood at the window watching the city glow through the rain. "You saw something," she said. Ryan turned the document toward her and pointed to the faded line. Rachel read it once, then again. "Twins. Maybe. I was never told I had a twin. It might not refer to you." Rachel folded her arms. "Then who?" Ryan shook his head. "That is why we wait for facts." 2 days later, the independent attorney arranged DNA testing through an accredited laboratory. Ryan explained everything to Emily as simply as he could. No promises. No frightening words. Just truth. "They want to see whether you and Rachel are family," he told her. Emily looked from Ryan to Rachel. "Like cousins." Rachel managed a small smile. "Maybe. Like sisters." Ryan nearly smiled. "Probably not." Emily thought for a moment. "Okay." The samples were collected, sealed, and sent away. Then came the waiting. 3 days felt longer than 3 years. Rachel stopped attending unnecessary meetings. Ryan continued working only after hotel management confirmed Daniel had been removed from decisions involving him. Emily went to school, finished homework, and insisted that Rachel learn how to make pancakes. Rachel burned the first batch. Emily laughed so hard she nearly spilled the orange juice. Ryan watched from the sink, surprised by how ordinary the moment felt. That frightened him more than the mystery. Ordinary things were how people entered your heart. On Friday afternoon, the results arrived. Rachel came to Ryan's apartment without a driver. Margaret arrived 10 minutes later. Emily sat between Ryan and Rachel at the kitchen table while the sealed report remained untouched. "Open it," Rachel whispered. Ryan did. His eyes moved across the first page, then stopped. Rachel searched his face. "What does it say?" Ryan read the conclusion again before answering. Rachel and Emily share a close biological relationship. Rachel covered her mouth. Margaret closed her eyes. Mother and daughter? Rachel asked. Ryan turned the page. No, Rachel froze. What? The probability does not support a parent-child relationship. Emily looked confused. Then what are we? Ryan continued reading. The laboratory had identified a relationship most consistent with second-degree maternal relatives, with additional testing recommended because of the unusual genetic pattern. Rachel stared at the report. Second degree? Margaret suddenly stood. Her chair scraped softly across the floor. Ryan looked at her. You know what this means. Margaret's face had gone pale. I know what it could mean. Rachel's voice became very quiet. Mom. Margaret sat again, trembling. When you were born, Rachel, there was another baby. Silence swallowed the room. A girl, Margaret continued. Your twin sister. Rachel stared at her mother as though language itself had failed. You told me I was an only child, because I believed she died shortly after birth. Ryan looked at the twin registry reference. The pieces were moving, but they had not settled. Rachel whispered, what was her name? Margaret answered, Rebecca. Emily reached for Ryan's hand. So Rachel is not my mom? No, sweetheart. Then who is? Nobody answered. Ryan turned to the final page, where the laboratory recommended comparison against a direct maternal sample. Attached was a note from the attorney. An archived sample associated with the second Hayes infant might still exist under the original registry number. Rachel looked at Emily, tears gathering in her eyes. If Rebecca survived, Ryan finished quietly, she could be Emily's mother. Emily squeezed his hand tighter. Does finding her mean I have to leave you? The question broke through every document, every secret, every adult fear in the room. Ryan immediately knelt beside her. No, promise. I promise. Truth can make a family bigger. It does not erase the people who loved you first. Rachel lowered herself beside Emily and nodded through tears. Your dad is right. Emily looked between them, uncertain but calmer. Then Margaret whispered something Ryan almost missed. There is one person who knew Rebecca survived. Rachel turned. Charles Price. Margaret shook her head. No. Her eyes moved to the silver bracelet on Emily's wrist. Grace. Grace had known. The realization settled over the kitchen with the weight of 7 missing years. Margaret stared at the silver bracelet while Rachel remained beside Emily, one hand resting quietly on the table. How? Rachel asked. Margaret swallowed. Grace came to me about 6 months before she died. She said Rebecca had survived, but she refused to tell me where she was. Why would she hide my sister from us? She said Rebecca had spent her whole life being moved around by decisions other people made for her. Grace wanted proof before she brought the Hayes family back into her life. Ryan understood that. Grace had never believed wealth gave anyone ownership over another person's choices. The next morning, the archived registry sample was legally released for comparison. By afternoon, the independent laboratory confirmed what the earlier test had suggested. Rebecca Hayes was Rachel's identical twin sister, and the archived genetic material showed a maternal relationship to Emily. Rachel read the report in silence. Emily was not her daughter. Emily was her niece. Ryan watched relief and grief cross Rachel's face at the same time. Rebecca is Emily's mother, Rachel whispered. Margaret nodded, tears filling her eyes. And I spent 28 years believing she was gone. Before anyone could speak again, Ryan's phone rang. It was the attorney. He listened for less than a minute before his expression changed. What is it? Rachel asked. Daniel called an emergency board meeting. Rachel's eyes hardened. Of course he did. By 4 o'clock, the executive conference room at Hayes Hospitality was filled with board members, attorneys, and senior staff. Daniel Price stood at the far end of the table, composed as ever. Ryan entered beside Rachel, wearing the same plain work shirt he had worn that morning. He had no expensive suit, no public relations team, just Grace's records in a worn folder. Daniel smiled thinly. Mr. Carter, this is a corporate matter. Ryan placed the folder on the table. Then stop using my daughter in it. The room quieted. Daniel argued that Rachel's judgment had become compromised, that private family claims were threatening the company, and that Ryan had created instability for financial leverage. Rachel started to respond, but Ryan gently raised a hand. Let him finish. Daniel did. Then Ryan opened Grace's folder. One document showed Charles Price had authorized the confidential transfer of the second Hayes infant. Another showed payments routed through a private trust for years afterward. The final page carried Daniel's signature from 18 months earlier, acknowledging access to those archived records. Rachel stared at him. You knew Rebecca lived. Daniel's confidence finally cracked. I knew there were records. You knew enough to tell me to stop digging. Silence. Daniel looked around the table, searching for support that no longer came. Ryan could have humiliated him. He could have read every private detail aloud. Instead, he closed the folder. Everything unrelated to Emily stays private. She is 7 years old. She is not evidence for anyone's ambition. One board member slowly nodded. Then another. Rachel looked at Ryan differently now, not as an employee, not as the keeper of a secret, but as the only person in the room who had been offered power and refused to misuse it. A reporter waiting outside later called toward him, Mr. Carter, if the Hayes family has a biological claim to Emily, what does that make you? Ryan stopped. Rachel stood beside him. Emily held his hand. He looked down at the little girl who had trusted him before anyone cared about laboratory reports, inheritance, or family names. Her dad, he said. Nothing more. The hallway fell completely silent. Then Emily tugged gently at Rachel's sleeve. If you are my aunt, does that mean I get to know you? Rachel crouched beside her, tears bright in her eyes. Only if you want to. Emily smiled. I think I do. Ryan smiled too, but Grace's final sealed envelope remained unopened in his jacket pocket. And beneath Rachel's name, almost invisible in faded ink, Grace had written one additional line Ryan had only just noticed. When Rebecca is ready, she already knows where to find you. For 3 weeks, nothing in Ryan's apartment became richer except the sound of laughter. Rachel did not send a limousine. She did not offer Ryan a house. She did not arrive carrying expensive gifts that might confuse love with money. She came on Tuesday mornings with coffee, on Thursday afternoons to help Emily with homework, and one Saturday with pancake batter that somehow ended up on the ceiling. You are terrible at this, Emily announced. I run 37 hotels. Hotels have chefs. Ryan turned away to hide his smile. Rachel pointed the spatula at him. Not one word. I did not say anything. Your face did. Those small mornings accomplished what boardrooms never could. Rachel learned that Emily hated peas, loved astronomy, and slept with the hallway light on during thunderstorms. Emily learned that Rachel drank coffee without sugar, could not whistle, and secretly cried at old Christmas movies. Ryan learned something too. Rachel Hayes was different when nobody expected her to be a chief executive officer. Quieter, warmer, human. Respect came first. Trust followed. Whatever might come after that, neither of them rushed to name it. Then, one Sunday afternoon, Emily set her phone on the kitchen counter and announced that they needed a family picture. Stand closer. Ryan and Rachel exchanged an awkward glance. Closer, Emily ordered. Rachel laughed and moved beside him. The camera clicked. Emily studied the photograph. You know something funny? What? Rachel asked. Everybody said I look like you. Rachel smiled. You do. Emily shook her head and wrapped both arms around Ryan. I think I look like Dad. Rachel's expression softened. I think you do too. Ryan understood what she meant. Not hair, not eyes, not blood. Emily carried his patience, Grace's kindness, and the quiet dignity of a childhood built from ordinary promises kept every day. That evening, after Emily fell asleep, Ryan finally removed Grace's sealed envelope from his jacket drawer. Rachel sat across from him at the kitchen table. Are you ready? She asked. I think Emily is. They opened it together. Inside was one page. Grace explained that Rebecca had contacted her shortly before Grace died. Rebecca knew where Emily was. She knew Ryan was raising her, and she had chosen not to return until she could offer stability instead of another disruption. At the bottom was a post office box and one final sentence. She will come when she believes Emily no longer needs protecting from the Hayes name. Ryan stared at the words. Then the apartment buzzer sounded. Once. Twice. Rachel looked toward the door. Are you expecting someone? No, Ryan walked downstairs. Through the glass entrance stood a blonde woman in a simple gray coat, holding an old photograph against her chest. For one impossible second, Ryan thought Rachel had somehow reached the lobby before him. Then he noticed the difference. This woman's hair was shorter. Her face carried years Rachel's did not. And hanging from her wrist was the third silver bracelet. Ryan opened the door. The woman's eyes filled immediately. Ryan Carter? He nodded. She took a trembling breath. My name is Rebecca Hayes. Rachel had followed him downstairs. She stopped halfway down the steps. Rebecca looked up. The identical sisters saw each other for the first time in 28 years, and neither spoke. Then a small voice came from behind Rachel. Emily had awakened. She stood barefoot on the stairs, holding the railing. Rebecca looked at her daughter and covered her mouth. Emily looked at Rebecca, then Rachel, then Ryan. Ryan walked back to Emily and offered his hand. She took it without hesitation. Rebecca did not rush forward. She did not claim anything. She simply whispered, "I have waited 7 years to tell you I am sorry." Emily studied her carefully. "Are you my mother?" Rebecca nodded through tears. "Yes, but Ryan is your dad. Nothing I say will ever change that." Emily squeezed Ryan's hand. Then she reached her other hand toward Rebecca. Months later, the photograph Emily had taken that Sunday sat framed above Ryan's piano, beside a newer one containing 4 smiling faces. Rachel stood beside him one evening, looking at both pictures. "Grace knew," she whispered. Ryan nodded. She knew family was never supposed to be a competition. Rachel slipped her hand gently into his. Across the room, Emily laughed with Rebecca over another ruined batch of pancakes. There was no fortune being handed over, no grand announcement, no miracle anyone could purchase. Just truth, grace, second chances, and people learning that love did not become smaller when another person entered the room. Ryan looked at Rachel. She smiled. And after 7 years of secrets, the silence in that home finally meant there was nothing left to hide.